wish we were here planning conference finals. Obviously, we all collectively came short of our goals. I want to say thank you to Coach Rivers, someone I tremendously respect and have worked with for a long time. Like I said yesterday, first ballot Hall of Famer, led us to advancing in the playoffs multiple times. Just really us and one other team have even advanced in the playoffs the last couple of years. And look, winning's hard, and Coach Rivers was a great leader and someone I learned a lot from. I want to say thank you to the Philly fans, as they've learned. And when I walk around Center City where I live, they give me the business. And even in the last day, I was getting it. And you know what? That's why we love Philly. Obviously I had many friends in the organization before I took this job, and I knew that was part of it. And, I appreciate, our home crowds are amazing. I wish we had delivered more, and we're going to do everything we can, myself, the players, ownership, to get this and get it that last step. And obviously we knew that was the mission, and we came short of it. So I'll take questions. Thanks.
Hey, Daryl, it was basically a year ago today that you and Doc sat up here together, and you were very adamant about keeping him as head coach. Just what changed over the last year that made you feel like this was the necessary move?
Yeah, my job to evaluate everything, and we felt like that was the best move for helping us get to our goals going forward. It was carefully thought out, and I recommended it to ownership, and they accepted it.
Hey, Daryl, back here. Sorry, Amy Fadul. A lot's been made about the connection you have with James Harden, obviously going back a number of years. How much input will he have and Joel Embiid have in the new coach?
Yeah, so we're taking a careful process with the coach. We do not think it will move quickly. I know I have to be careful with the process word, but it is true. We're going to look at all the candidates. We're already very encouraged by the candidates that reached out. We have an MVP player. We have a great roster that lots of players want to play with. Lots of coaches want to be with. So we will look at that carefully. The players won't have a direct input in the coach. Obviously, who we have as players, I think, impacts, how, you want to look for a coach that is a fit with, how we want to play and the players we have. But the players won't have an input in that.
To follow up on that, while they won't have an input going forward, James the other day described his relationship with Doc as okay. How much did that factor into what happened?
Yeah, obviously it's the business we're in that, players and coaches too, they have to give these instant answers. I get the benefit of, a couple days between, the toughest situation, that the players have faced in a long time and giving answers to you today. I think people make too much of those snap answers right after a loss like that. I think Doc had great relationships with his players. We wouldn't have had the success we had without it. And his relationship with both Joel and James was very strong. I think people saw that chemistry on the court between the three of them, and that was something that was not an issue.
Up on that part too. You mentioned Joel and his relationship with Doc. Stephen A. on television last night reported that Joel was not happy about Doc getting fired. How concerning is that to you? What are your thoughts on that?
They had a strong relationship. I mean, I have to make tough calls all the time with trades. Joel was disappointed in, some of it was he didn't know the player we were getting in the trade who ended up helping us, but he was disappointed in the players that went out. I think it's natural to be very close with the people in the locker room. He was very close with Coach Rivers, and he was shocked about the change, and and it's my job to help convince him that the new coach is someone that he'll have a great relationship with as well.
What's the profile of the new head coach, and is previous NBA head coaching experience a requirement?
I wouldn't say requirement. I think when you get into requirements, you miss opportunities. But I would say that we have a roster ready to win. Obviously, we've been very successful, just came up short of our goals. I think we have an MVP level player, and I do think it. If you look at the history of the NBA, it's challenging to walk into that as a first-time NBA head coach. That doesn't mean it hasn't worked. There are, for every rule, there are solid counterexamples. So we're not going to go in with like a prescription or proscription, but, we're looking for someone who brings leadership accountability, someone who is good at tactics, someone who has great relationship with his star players, and someone who is good at recruiting star players and players want to play for, someone who builds a great organization. And I 100% believe we had that with Coach Rivers, so I want to be very clear but those are the kinds of criteria we looked at. Those are the kinds of criteria that led to hiring Doc, and we're going to work hard to find someone who hits all those marks again.
Daryl, to your right. Obviously, James and Joel probably weren't at their best in games 6 and 7 in that series against the Celtics. Didn't play as well as they had played or could play. Is your logic behind the move that a different coach can extract more from them, in particular in situations like that?
Well, I think both Joel and James came up big in a lot of games. I think, obviously, look, we win or lose as a group, as a front office, players, coaches, collectively. I think sometimes it's how we're guarded. Sometimes it's things like that. But it's not no loss or win is on any one player. And both Joel and James had big games during the playoffs and during all 3 years since I've been here. Well, Joel in all 3 years and James in the last year and a half. So, I felt like that a change had the ability to help us going forward. Trent Krim.
Okay. Daryl, with the lack of progress of being able to get past the second round, how much responsibility, since you're the one that puts the team together, how much responsibility do you think you have in this team not getting further than they did?
Yeah, I think number one, me. It is a collective effort, but I was brought in for a reason, just like Coach Rivers was. So I would put it on myself first. I don't accept that we haven't advanced. I do think we're a much better team than we were the prior year or the year before that. We've set sort of a arbitrary line that I understand. I'm not rejecting that. That's obviously, to win the championship, you have to make it farther than the second round. So I understand the math of that. But I would say there's been a lot of progress within that, in that, Maxey taking big steps forward, Joel progressing to the MVP. I think James Harden is better than the second best player we've had. This year we lost to a heck of a team than the Boston Celtics, who have a very good chance to go on to win the championship. So progress is there, in my opinion. And I promise you, next year, if we make the conference finals but fall short, Howard or others will be writing how we just have never made the finals, and so look, our goal is to win the championship. It's not to make the second round or third round, so I would understand that as well. So
Okay, it is a results business.
yeah,
Okay, having gotten past the second round, when you talk,
I would say, to be fair, I would say we haven't won the championship. I'm just saying, like, I would reframe it that. Let's just reframe it that way. Would be
Okay.
how I would say it.
what do you tell ownership after you let go to the coach as to why you should keep your job?
I tell ownership winning's hard. We have made progress, and frankly, like, I feel like I'm the best guy to lead the 76ers, and ownership believes that. And then if we don't advance, I understand if something happens from there.
I guess you reset that bar there and said you didn't win the championship. If Doc had won one more game, would this move have had to be necessary?
I don't like to totally talk in, theoreticals, but I do think, when I wasn't here when Doc came in, but I know the goal was to get, to the conference finals or farther, really to win the championship, but that's also the goal given to me. So, yeah, one more win is something that would obviously have been a very positive thing, and hopefully it would have been 9 more wins if I can do the math. So.
You talked about James and Joel having some big moments, but Game 6 at home had a lead with 5-4 minutes left, and then offense went away. And then in Game 7, obviously, they didn't have the production they would have wanted. Were they accountable with you in their meetings after the season ended about their performance in the biggest moments?
Again, I've had discussions with all our key players since the season ended. Those are hard discussions. Just like I said, it's unfair to throw a mic. I mean, it is the business, but they get a mic in front of them right after the loss. It's still very hard for them to process things right after, even a day or two later. But 100%, like they had a mirror out, and they weren't blaming anyone but how they could be better. And specifically, multiple players were like, hey, I need to work on this and that in our game. So it was a very, very positive mental approach. I thought that everyone was taking ownership and what they need to do better.
And a follow-up with James obviously having the player option. Do you anticipate him being back here with the Sixers, being able to re-sign him?
Who's that, James? We can't have those discussions yet, but we are interested in bringing him back. Well, that's the only way to do it.
Daryl, on the subject of accountability for your star players, I know a big theme at the end of the last couple of seasons has been, guys saying we weren't tough enough, or didn't do this, we didn't do that. Having brought in guys like PJ, guys like DeAnthony that are supposed to add to that toughness, at what point is that just a reflection of your star players?
Well, I think in general, I do think we improved on the toughness angle. I think, having been in this business for a long time, when you lose, there's going to be something to point to, right? So I do think it was very important, and the elements PJ added and Melton added were really critical for us. But really the problem we have is the one Howard had. Like or whoever asked me about one more game, like we didn't outscore the opposition by 1 point more one more time in the second round. So like at the end of the day, it's a whole mix of players, toughness, shot making, rebounding, offense, transit. Like it's a big mix of that. And only a couple players in the league push all the buttons across all those elements, and so you can add toughness, but then maybe you have less off the ball movement. You can add, so it's a mix, and it's my job, it's the front office job to make sure that mix is as good as possible. I do think we addressed a lot of those questions, which is why I was talking about progress. That I do think a lot of progress has been made. and we need to keep making progress to get farther.
And on the subject of James's free agency, I know you can't get too far into it, but I guess earlier in James's career, it's an easy decision to say we pay him whatever the most we can pay him is, and we don't think about it. I guess looking at how his playoffs turned out, where he has multiple 40-point games and then middle of the series, end of the series, fades into the background like everyone else, how does that factor into, how much you're willing to give him in terms of years and money?
Yeah, sorry, Kyle, I normally answer your questions. I really can't go into like something that, between us and their agency, and we haven't even started because we're not allowed to talk to them yet. So.
Thanks. I mean, if there's a scenario where James doesn't come back, I mean, do you still feel you have the core of a championship contender? Do you feel like you can make the moves needed? I guess the players are out there that to keep this ball rolling. You don't necessarily need to, I don't want to say rebuild, but kind of retool and look further down the road.
Yeah, I mean, we have to plan for every scenario, right? And for sure, he has the option to be a free agent, and so we have to plan for all those scenarios. And we feel like that's a scenario we can continue to move forward. Look, we have to remember, there's like 26 teams that would rather have our roster. We're starting with the MVP of the league, so. The draft lottery yesterday was hoping to get a top pick to hope that player becomes as good as the MVP of the league. So we start in a great spot, and yeah, we have a lot of free agents, so we're gonna lose some free agents. There's some key ones we'd like to bring back, but we feel good about the alternate scenarios as well. Scenario A would be to bring James back. Scenario B, if he's not back, we'll have to get creative, and we feel good about the tools available to us if that happens.
Hey, Daryl. Kind of following up on what Kyle asked, it seems like at this time last year you had a really clear sense of we need to get tougher, we need to add more two-way players.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think you similarly understand what went wrong and what needs to broadly be addressed this offseason?
Yeah, so, we go through besides the coaching search, we go through a pretty careful process on, with the front office on what needs to be done, and we haven't gone through that yet, obviously. So we will figure that out going forward. But, I think last year was a little more straightforward, especially the two-way player part. The toughness part I thought was real, but it is a little bit harder to, sometimes that's used like just if you win or lose. I think two-way players is a little more clear, and I think we did address a lot of that. We still have, a lot of things to improve, though, and so we do have some normal improvements that are coming this year, though, with Maxey, we think, has a real shot to be one of the top players in the league. He is absolutely, committed to putting the work in, as we know. So I think that's an area that's pretty exciting. And then Joel Embiid, as you've seen, I wouldn't bet against him improving again. He's done it every year since I've been here. He's done it, I believe, every year before I got here. I didn't track it as close, but he went from obviously not playing to playing, and his health is improving and his game's improving. And again, a lot of the conversation with Joel was just him immediately like, hey, I can do more. I can work on this. I'm watching the playoffs. I'm looking at this guy. I can add that to my game, and I wouldn't bet against him.
We'll take a few more guys. We'll go to Sam first. Sam, Gina, and then we'll go back to Daryl.
Daryl, you already kind of alluded to this, but you mentioned of the traits you want in a coach, tactics. I know you kind of have more discussions to do, but as far as what you're looking at right now, what specific tactics are you looking to improve on going forward?
I was just trying to lay out the entire criteria. I actually think people put too much importance on that. It ends up being a much smaller part of the game than people expect. I mean, relative to working with your star players, recruiting star players, things like that. It is an important element, but it's it tends to get overvalued. It tends to get overvalued by people like me, frankly, because it's an area that, I just naturally have an interest in, and I think a lot of people do. But it can only be one part of the puzzle. I promise you. Like it's just one part of the picture. So.
And then to follow up on that, what do you kind of do to yourself to kind of slow down when you're thinking too much of tactics? Kind of slow yourself down and maybe prioritize the other things more so.
I mean, I'm not really involved in the tactics. Like the coach handles that. So I don't. That doesn't even come up. Yeah, sorry to. Yeah. Others.
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't sure
Gina.
if I was next.
Double question, Gina. I like it.
Okay. When you were rattling off some of the other criteria that you're looking for, you did mention that Doc obviously had a lot of those. So is there a missing ingredient or something? Is it just a matter of having a different voice, or I guess kind of what is maybe the difference that you're going to look for in this time around?
Yeah, I think I mentioned about the players, right? Look, if you look at players, unless you take some of the all-time greats, Michael Jordan or whatever, who are a 10 on almost every scale. Players, coaches, front office, you have strengths across different things. So sometimes it's a fit thing. It's like, we need a little more of this and a little less of that. So it's not any specific, like we need X. It's like, with the new coach, the mix of strengths that they have, how are they going to work with the mix of strengths of our players? And we feel like we can, that this was the right decision to move forward.
Sorry, Daryl. Just quickly, I know you've kind of touched on this, but a lot of the names that are out there are coaches that have won championships recently, coaches of the year, candidates, and winners. How much stock do you put in that, a proven winner, as opposed to maybe a younger coach that hasn't had that chance yet?
Yeah, it's part of the mix. I mean, the available coaches is very strong, and that's why we're encouraged by the ones that have reached out to us already. As you mentioned, recent championships. It's a factor. I mean, it's a factor. Definitely not a litmus test, but all else equal, I do think that can lend a lot of credibility with players that, hey, I just did this. I think that matters, and it's why adding like a PJ Tucker last year is also a positive. Hey, when I just did this with Milwaukee, these were some of the key elements, and I know that gave him a lot of voice in the locker room.
You mentioned that Joe has had big moments in this series, but throughout his career, his efficiency in the second round takes a very big hit. I guess, why do you think that is, and what do you think you can do to put him in a better position?
Yeah, that was a big conversation with Joel. Again, led by Joel, to his credit, and working through like, hey, how can I make sure I can still get to my spots? How can I make sure that when they are trying to take this away, I have a counter, things like that. So. Look, it's something that we, and I'll just put it on myself, we need to do a better job that during the season because the regular season can often be a Wednesday against a bad team, and Joel's so good he can just dominate a game without them doing a lot of keying. That's why I thought a lot of reps against, say, Toronto or Brooklyn this year were good, that they were guarding him with like heavy double teams and different looks. We want to try and make sure that we get him those similar kinds of like high intensity defensive looks during the regular season, and have that be something he's more comfortable in as we get into the playoffs. And so I think that's a big priority, to continue to give him rep after rep, and so he can work on it in the off season and during the season, so he's ready for the really, really focused defenses that he faces in the playoffs.
And I guess just one final one. With the new CBA, there is a second, much more punitive apron. How much does that factor in when you're considering these larger contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the details of that new CBA are still haven't been totally finalized, but a lot of them don't kick in till later. So look, I mean, I do think that's something, like, speaking of strengths and weaknesses, that is something that our front office is very good at, is like finding areas to take advantage of the new set of guidelines we work